Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal clan of the Eora Nation on whose land we are this evening. May we follow in their footsteps on this land that they have kindly walked together with the Jewish people, and we honor their elders past, present, and emerging. And at this point, I always like to remind ourselves of the elders of this museum, the Holocaust survivors, who have been giving their time, their energy, and telling their history for nearly 30 years. This is our 30th birthday in November, and the Holocaust survivors are the heart and soul of this museum, so we always honor them and thank them and remember them. That's the most important part. So tonight, as I said, we have Mike Leibowitz, Mark Tredinnick, and myself, Raymond. Welcome to all of you, our three poets of the evening. We look very, very forward to hearing more from you all. And now I'd like to introduce Jackie Wasilewski. So Jackie runs our Community Stories branch. She's published, I've lost track. I used to say 101, 102. Jackie will tell you exactly 100 and what she's at the moment. An amazing amount of books, and we've had wonderful book launches and published amazing books. But I'm going to let Jackie tell you all about that. So without any further ado, let's welcome Jackie Wasilewski. Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you, as usual, Aviva. I'd just like to welcome you all to the museum and salute you for your devotion to poetry, because anybody who's come out tonight deserves an award, I think. I've been asked to tell you what I do at the museum and how Michael's book came to be part of the books that we publish. I run the Community Stories department, which I guess is the publishing arm of the museum. We provide a service for members of our community to write or to tell their stories. And we do everything from oral history taking through to ghost writing, editing of manuscripts, design of the books, basically everything from woe to go. So originally our publications were the stories of Holocaust survivors, because this is a museum that was established by Holocaust survivors. But over the years, we've branched out and we've done stories about Iraqi Jews, Indian Jews, Jews from Shanghai, South Africa, and you wouldn't believe it, but even Australian Jews. A few years ago, I was approached by Izzy Siegel to do a book of his South African poetry, and that has actually led to what is now, I guess, a sideline of Community Stories, because we've done quite a few poetry books. During the first COVID lockdown, we published Bettina Bock's book of poetry of Holocaust trauma. And during last year's lockdown, Michael approached me to publish the poetry book that you're going to experience tonight. Our team got to read his poetry while we were locked in our homes, which was lovely for us. Working with Michael was an absolute pleasure. He's so professional, and he has an obsessive eye for detail, which is reflected in this book. Even with the design, which he worked on with Audrey Larson, our designer who's here tonight, the actual design itself is evidence of Michael's perfectionism. I'd like to just wish you all the best, Michael, and for any of those of you here, I have to tout my program. If you have any interest in either writing or telling your own stories, please be sure to contact us at the Sydney Jewish Museum to help you to do that. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy this evening of lovely poetry.
Thank you, Jackie, and Mazel Tov. So now I'm going to call on Mike Leibowitz and Mark Tredinnick to have an in-conversation chat and to officially launch Michael's book. So please welcome them to the stage.
Hello everybody, you can hear us. Before we start, I want to express thanks. Now, these thanks come from the heart. This is not lip service. Loudest thanks to the Sydney Jewish Museum for every aspect of them. To the team, Audrey Larson, editor, sage, and patron saint of minutiae. Jackie Wasilewski, indefatigable optimist, and patron saint of can do. Aviva Wolf, realist, and patron saint of this is what's actually doable, without making me even more neurotic than I actually am. Thank you, Aviva. Mark Trudinnik, poet, teacher, mensch, who bestrides the Australian literary world like a colossus. Mark, we are honoured to have you, and we feel very honoured that you've come all the way from Baruch to be here with us. Marcel Friedman, poet and academic Amazon. Janine, my wife, I wrote this little haiku. It's called How Long to Make a Poem. It takes a life and a day. A life to live it, a day to write it. So I have been a poet in the making for a lifetime, and that's a long time. And that's as long as my long-suffering wife has really known me. I find myself tonight sandwiched between John Keats and Emily Dickinson. And I wonder how the hell I'm going to shape up without sounding more like Baldrick than Blackadder. Mark.
Oh, it's lovely to be here, Mike. Well, welcome, folks. Can you hear me all right? This is right, good. It's fantastic to be here with Mike. I prepared for this event thoroughly by having 2 teeth out. Had some dental surgery, and I want you to consider how easy it might be to say the following words with your mouth full of gauze and your jaw anesthetized, because that's the position I found myself in last Friday after surgery, when I was sitting in the chair dazed with this book in my, not just because of the bookmark, but dazed with this book in my hand. And the very lovely attendant said to me, "Oh, tell me about the book you're reading." So these are the words one has to get across at that moment. Leibowitz, to practice that with your mouth full of gum. Leibowitz, dermatology, South Africa, Lithuania, or was it Latvia? Communism, Jewish diaspora, that's hard even with my mouth wide open. Bathtub philosopher, Schrodinger's cat, conscientious masterclass, lyricism, vegetables, fish, Horace, workshop, mentorship, composition, launch, Sydney Jewish Museum. All of which I tried to get through half hit, and all of that is my slant way of introducing Mike in a way. It's a great pleasure to be here. It's a very difficult thing to get a haiku into the world, as Mike says, let alone a whole book. And it's a remarkable thing that Mike's done here, and it's been a pleasure for me to accompany him on some of that journey. It's lovely to be here with Marcel too, and you've got 3 quotes whose names start with M. I'm not sure why that's relevant, but it's got to be good, so you hear from us later. I'm going to talk with Mike about what motivates poetry, why we think it counts, how he got to where he's at. Just a couple of thoughts. First, in poetry, something is remembered about language and about being. Something about language and being, something about love and sanity and dignity and time and place, without which we begin to forget ourselves. This is why poetry counts. It's the discourse in which the rest of it gets remembered, brought back together and said. Seriously, strangely, sideways, metaphorically, lots of different ways, but that's its project, I think. And I might mention Auden. You can be Auden. Why don't you be Winston tonight? I'm going to mention Auden, who was a dedicatee of sanity and plain speech. So some thoughts that I know Mike's going to kick around, but just to begin. It was the love of love, the love that swallows up all else, a grateful love, a love of nature, of people, of animals, a love engendering gentleness and goodness. That moved me and that I saw in you. Do you know who wrote those words? Jody does, down the back, because they're written on my coffee cup. Oh, we have a dog named for William Carlos Williams. It's William Carlos Williams. Isn't that lovely? And I think Jody may apologize. Williams had his wife in mind, of course, in those words. And I'd like to think Jody might have me in mind. But I've got you in mind. Of course, there's among the many kinds of poets there might be. Mike is many of them, actually, but he's certainly one of the real ones. And there's levity in the work. There is love in work, I think. I think poetry unmotivated by love for some of those kind of things, especially that which makes us human, that which life is, ideas, language itself critically, which seems to me to be going missing in action in a lot of poetry I read these days. Just love of language, the service of its beauty and wonder are things, Mike, that I think you carried into the room, that you carry into the room in the book. I mean, which you write. But what do you think about that? You a lover?
I'd like to think that I am a lover, and I'm also loved, because I spent quite a bit of the book thinking about dedicated to love, and I think that love is, for me, started off for me as something which was infatuation. I met my wife when we were both at high school, and I was totally infatuated with her. And then we went our own ways, and we landed up in a situation where my wife said to me, "Listen, Michael, you better marry me or else I'm moving on." So it was the ultimatum. But it's something, I think that love, that kind of love, is something which grows from shared life.
Yeah.
I think that's a hugely important part. And I'm a person with many faults.
No.
And my wife has come to accept that in me. And I see that as, really basic part of a relationship, accepting that people are less than perfect.
Like, can I just take you back to the beginning of the poetry thing? It's hard to say when beginning to begin, right? But most poets who have an epiphany, to whom poetry occurs, is a famous Neruda poem, isn't there, on that score? Most of those poets are like 18, 19, 20. I have a feeling you were a little older than that when it struck you.
Yes, well, this is very odd because, I'd been introduced to poetry when I was a youngster at school. And today it would be considered, in South African terms, a vrot school. Vrot is an Afrikaans word meaning overripe fruit, which is slightly rotten. The school that I went to was vrot. And there was no such thing as explaining or teaching poetry. We just were called upon to commit screeds of poetry to memory. And that poetry has stayed with me all my life. And sometimes amazing words pop into my mind. And I think, my God, am I really thinking this? And I think hard. I think, oh, well, it's actually John Donne. And so that's stayed with me all my life. And it's informed my thinking and my personality, and it was almost like a lengthy incubation.
Yeah, you let it run on.
Let it run
50 years.
50 years. And then what happened was that COVID happened. I went into quarantine because of COVID. And it was almost like the mental furniture, my mental furniture was being rearranged. And I viewed it almost as my mind as an overgrown garden where there had been a clearing. And this poetry started to emerge. And it's not that it emerged from me, it came to me. This is the amazing thing, that I was like the reciprocal, the recipient. These verses would appear to me in the middle of the night, often when I was in a slightly disturbed dream or a slightly altered state of consciousness. And they were so striking, some of the images, that I would get out of bed in the middle of the night and I would write them down. And then the next morning, because you can't get that stuff from anywhere else. And the next morning, I would bring the logical side of my brain to bear. And that would make some kind of sense of it and put it into, sort of ring it through the iron bars of some kind of a discipline and create something which could be a respectable piece of poetry.
Right. And endure. Now, this must have been happening for you in the first months of 2020, so COVID strikes, because I think we first met, it feels like it was August, July or August, was it about the middle of 2020?
Yeah.
And I run, for my sins, one of the things I do is teach, and I teach a one-day poetry course, workshop, which Mike, that's where we...
Yeah, on the one-day course.
Yes. We ran it on Zoom, which we were all getting used to then. And so here's Mike and his 50-odd poems that have occurred to him in the night. And so somebody telling me he could wrangle words into a bit of shape and start counting some syllables and do all of that kind of stuff. Do you remember the first thing you wrote in that workshop, Mike?
Yes, I do. And it was that, oh gosh, you got the book. We got the book. It was that. I think it could be. It had to be not a Sudoku. It was a Seiju.
So I was talking about Seijo, which is a Korean form, and Mike had material for a Seijo, which I think we worked on over lunch, and it's South African material, right? If I'm remembering that, I've got an African night and animal cries and stars in my mind.
That's right. That's right. This is so tantalising, Mark. We should have thought of that. We should have thought of this beforehand.
Yeah.
Yes.
But that's how we did one.
Yeah.
How are you doing? Finding your way?
Oh God, when you want it, you can never find it. You know, it's sod's law, isn't it?
So while you find it, the way that Mike and I worked together was that he did that, and then he came along and did a master class, which also I've been running online. Which has been a wonder. I see some of my students in the audience here tonight. Hello, Wendy, and others here. And then Mike came and said, "Well, I've got more poems than we worked on in class, and I think I have a book." So Mike and I mentored through a couple of sessions through about 6 or 8 months, I think, Mike. Wasn't it?
Yeah.
And the final part of that mentorship was actually taking. I've never seen so many poems come so quickly to anyone. I had to be quite so finished on arrival, and then we worked them hard. Mike's a fantastic partner in education, if I can put it that way, not just a learner, he's a teacher too. And so we ended up at the end of it shaping the book, which was just terrific fun too. But you found Intermezzo.
It's called Intermezzo, and this is the Seijo. As the sun sets, the gentle cooing of the doves gives way to hungry dog howls of hyena and other denizens of the arena. But in between a silence, from before the birth of sound, forms, holds. And that's what we worked on at lunchtime.
Pretty good, huh? Okay, nice.
And it's about that peculiar moment in Africa in a sunset where the day sounds suddenly stop. And then there's a silence, and then the night sounds start up. And it's about that silence, that moment of silence between these two very, very different in every aspect of the word worlds, with the African day, the world of the day in Africa and the world of the night. The African night sounds are just amazing, totally primordial.
Mike referred there to the kind of free fall of inspiration from which the poems seem to come, mostly for you, Mike, and for many of us, and then to the hard work in the morning, like the morning work of the poet, if you like, is to make the thing robust, is to give it a form that will outlast the night when you're not there to explain the madness. Something like that, I think. And Asijo is an interesting instance because Mike had a whole lot more poem there, as I recall.
Yeah.
But Asijo, from the Korean tradition, insists upon a syllable count per line, it's about 15 syllables per line, 3 lines, and a few other constraints. And my sense of hearing that poem now is I don't know what all the rest of the other words were for, because it's just so, like, the pressure that the form puts on doesn't constrain the thing. I think it releases the thing to itself.
Well, you know, it goes back to Miss van der Rohe, less is more.
I know.
Yeah. There's so much in that.
Speaking of which, they're not overrun. No, we're doing
I
fine.
don't know, I think we should move on.
Yeah, what we're going to do here is, Mike and I are just chatting a bit. We'll just 1 or 2 more questions quickly, Mike, and then we're all going to read, Marcel and Mike and I. And Mike's going to read a poem to bring us home. Mike, can I ask, to give you a sense of this book, Mike's irreverent, Mike's serious, Mike's pretty funny, he's a romantic, and he's a tender kind of skeptic, if I can put it that way. Lovely paradoxes, I think, and poets need to be a little mixed up, I think. Poetry, necessarily, if it's going to speak for what it really means to live, it must articulate a paradox, I suppose, coexistence of opposites. And Mike, you've got a bunch of those things, but there are some wonderfully serious. I'm going to ask you to read this poem if you want to find it. It's so odd.
Oh, yeah, I'll read that, yeah.
Okay, do you want to read that next? If I throw to that, and then
yeah, sure.
Actually, you might just, Mike, can I read next?
Yeah, I'll read next.
Yeah, okay. So actually, with that introduction, that might, we'll throw to my next reading then, and then I'll leave you to do a reading, and then am I up? Is that?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a poem actually that I didn't work on at all, and I didn't know it until Mike mentioned it, and I think Mike's going to give you a smattering of poems from across the many mics, but he's an open mic, hey? Across the many mics that in fact there are, the many selves that inhabit. This one is, I think, a wonderful poem. It's actually got, on the page, it's very tight. I think it's quatrains from there.
Quatrains, yeah.
Quite short lines, but you probably won't know that when you hear it because it's got a lovely fluency of the best of Mike's mind and voice, like Auden, insisting upon getting difficult things said plainly in the idioms of everyday speech. Even in Auden's case, I make no comment on Mike's in particular, even at the risk of edging up on cliche, on commonplace expression, because there's a profound humanity involved in the poetry of people like Auden. I've got Hannah Arendt's wonderful piece on Auden here in front of me. I'm teaching it to my literary journalism class at the moment, and it was on my mind. And it's so connected, Mike, to your profound dedication to beauty and sanity, but also a dedication to never foregoing the clarity of the thought, even at the risk of offending some possible readers, including one's wife sometimes. But never surrendering that, because there's a truth that counts and there's a humanity that counts. And I think this poem's an instance of a poem that pursues that.
Well, thank you so much. This is a poem called It's So Odd, and it was actually based on a comment that somebody made. And the comment was, it's so odd to be living again. And they said it after the end of the first lockdown. And the poem goes like this. It's so odd, people said, after lockdown's grip was lifted, to be living again, as though they'd risen Lazarus-like from the dead. But not for those of us who never lived before. By that I mean we'd lived, of course, but in a state of becoming and not one of being. It's a very fine art, that, the art of living, to be seduced by the sublimeness of the present. Perhaps it's part of the people. For millennia, the present has been, for us Jews, so unbearable that we could find a home in aspiration and in time, in the past, that repository of memory, or in the future, that estate of hope. But never the now. How I envy my cat Maggie, who plays Virgil to the Dante in the Divine Comedy of my life. She is my guide and mentor. What cares she for global warming or pandemics, as she lies furled as a fern, blissfully at perp? She segues herself seamlessly between repose and wakefulness, with all the worlds her present.
Which just reminds me to say too that I don't think there's been a poet since T.S. Eliot who gave such central place to cats. In his poetry, so I think you are in a noble tradition.
I'm glad I'm in good company.
So
Okay.
I
My stock has gone up, guys.
might leave the stage to you, Mike, for a bit and just rather get in my poems. But I suppose I should say, as it were formally, it's my great joy and honour to declare your book, your poetry book, Looking In, launched, and we're all much better for
it. We emigrated to first New Zealand from South Africa, and emigration was hard. So this is a poem on that theme of loss. I yearn, it's called Return. I yearn to return to be interred in the place where I was born. The body returns to dust as nature decrees it must. And the landscape of childhood, so keenly pressed upon the mind, is turned in turn to mud of the same kind. This is the way of a wheel, the feel of the perfect circle, the feel of the perfect circle. It's about an idea that I have that there is such thing as an inner landscape that one has, and the landscape of your childhood is imprinted on your mind, and you never really escape that. So that's the theme of that poem. The next poem I'm going to read is called The Brain, and it was written from my memories of dissecting a human brain as a medical student. And I was struck by several things about the brain. Firstly, about how ugly it was, physically, to look at. Secondly, it was so bizarre to think that this had once been a human being, that someone had to die for me to be in this position to hold this brain in my hand. It was a very strange feeling. The other thing about the brain, which was quite unique to me, I think, was that I was really attracted by the names of the parts. If you've got a love for words, and that's what poetry is all about in many respects, it's got to do with words, then you'll understand this fascination with words. And the parts of the body have got wonderful names, like the gastrocnemius, it's a muscle. I mean, I think if we have another child or another cat, we're going to call it gastrocnemius. It's such a wonderful sounding word. And the brain's got all these wonderful parts to it. One is called the hippocampus. The hippocampus, does anybody know what that means?
Seahorse.
The seahorse. The hippocampus is a seahorse. There's a part of the brain which is called the seahorse. It looks like a walnut, the human brain, only larger, of course. It has two coverings too, an intimate inner and a tough outer carapace. The pure mater, the tender mother, and the dura mater, the sturdy one. It takes two mothers, it seems, to love such an ugly child, but precious too. So much evolution in an organ that grew without a thought to its own aesthetics or texture, derelict as a tramp. Have you ever held a human brain in your hands? It's like holding all history, all humanity. This now insensate cross between mushroom and a cauliflower, once the seat of another life. Imagine that, the brain contemplating the brain. You're doing it now. Imagine Pia Mater's tears coursing down her cheeks at her child's fate. A modern-day Pieta. They had flair, the old anatomists who first discovered the brain. Looking for buried treasure, they found the unexpected, a new topography. X marks the spot, a bridge. The Pons Veroli, wonderful sound. The Pons Veroli, the seahorse, the hippocampus, breasts, the corpus mammillare, and the pineal, home of the soul, or so Descartes taught. But not the zonula poetica, the fountainhead of verse. That eluded them and eludes us still. This is a poem about feral cats, wild cats, which we came across in Sicily. The smaller towns in Sicily are just full of wild cats. It's amazing. Those tawny feral cats, the great unloved, survey their domain through yawny eyes. But that's not quite true, is it? Once the cat lady loved them. What cared they she was village-centric? She is now long gone, and the cats can only dream of that golden age, when she fed them manna and love. But feral cats don't love back. They're defiant, proud of their outlaw status. They're citizens neither of homestead's hearth nor hillside's heath, but brigands of the realm, denizens of the limbus. This is one about love. We started off talking about love. It's called Paean to Love. When the Lord God created us, he wove in our own mortality. Age, that thief, creeps upon us. But disease bursts in at noon with braggadocio, and a dagger set with jewels of malicious intent. Of all the forms that love takes, liquid love suits me best. Love that flows with ease and envelops me, and intoxicates like wine, and purifies like water. Love's liquid immersion stems from a shared life. Why, only yesterday, before I'd even entered my home, my wife called from upstairs. Yes, what went wrong? What went wrong at work today? How do you know? From your footstep. Well, that's liquid love. It tempers all ills, in particular that of uncreation, that bides its ineluctable time in the umbras of the body and the shoals of the mind. This poem is called As One Grows Older, and it was based on my wife moaning to me about the number of doctor's appointments she had. Life is measured out in waiting rooms as one grows older. Such a plethora of waiting rooms. Doctors' rooms, dentists' rooms, allied professionals' rooms, optometrists, audiologists, each the same antechamber, that equally forgettable non-space. Everybody had that experience? Nothing serious, you know. A bit of routine maintenance, oil change and lubrication, bits and bobs, odds and ends, bunions and barnacles, noughts and crosses, tap tap here, tap tap there, pins and needles, war and peace, wear and tear, snakes and ladders, bowels and bladders, sense and sensibility, crime and punishment, salt and pepper, pride and prejudice, everywhere a tap tap. The worst of times and the best of times. Ah, but I ramble on. It comes with age. Age caricatures character. How you age is who you were, but magnified. The ungenerous grow stingier still, the appalled more appalling. For there is no fool like an old fool, as the saying goes. Or age can do the opposite, set free the soul, and turn serene the unquiet mind. And I would now like to finish off with a poem written to my wife, and it's called Growing Older Together. Growing older together is like the alchemy of a slow braised stew. Where do they come from, those complex flavors? Especially since you and I started out as two such imperfect cuts of meat. Sorry. A life of regrets is a regrettable life. Growing old together can make you impetuous. Will you get drunk on bull's blood? Will you get a piercing, silver-nosed stud? Will you take LSD and eat cannabis cookies for tea? Will you spike your hair green when you visit the Queen? Will you get a tattoo and flesh in the zoo? So you see, my dear wife, there's lots left to do.
It was absolutely marvelous. You made us smile, you made us laugh, and you made us think.
Much more for your money.
And I'm glad you didn't call me bossy, so you get a gold star for that as well.
Please.
And now we'd love to hear some of your poetry. Thank you, Mark.
5 or 6 poems here. This book is for sale. Mike's is for sale. No one gets to leave without purchasing the books of all 3 of us here tonight. If you would, that would be a great pleasure. So I'm going to read from a brand new thing, which is in no book yet, and then a couple of poems from a book that comes out in May, which you can't get, but we could order in advance, and a couple from Walking the Water. Flood Tide, or Compassionate Grounds. I sit in the middle of a morning, 2 spaniels spooled at my feet. The neighbour's latest piece of loud industrial kit makes a bid for a remnant silence in which shorebirds would rather put down and browse mudflats. So many fingers on so many keys. The minutes lose their breath with calling out my name, and sitting still and getting on with all I'd said I must becomes a harder thing each second than the last. If 5 hearts beat inside this chest, they all stand a good chance of breaking under the weight of the work the world puts on them today. How best to spend, where first to send one's care. A mother in the cancer ward, hoping the scans make a promise the years won't break too soon. A friend too young to have to sit among his children and wait for his liver to come good. And out among the northern rivers a flood the size of Eastern Europe spreads, and your son watches half the wharves in Brisbane crash downstream. On Instagram, the causes clamour. The children, like children on a rooftop, their hair dreadlocked in downpour. like old people sleeping rough in the subways of Kiev? Did we not have enough trouble in the world, enough knots, enough rope, the billowing carbons, the wilding weather, the loneliness that nowhere knows how to end? Without another mad abstractionist, another ideologue visiting a vainglorious and dilapidated plotline on the neighbours? If only this were just another head of school or local Pharisee, and not instead a tyrant with the people under his thumb and a nuclear arsenal within his reach. Ah, Ukraine, the sadness you have known, the famine, the dying, the flying free, the dying again. You are all of us, but you are far from us, so how much will we choose to hurt? And how much will I put at risk to care? The sexually transgressed, the dispossessed, the overlooked, the maimed, the remaindered, the anguished, the chronically underslept, the unplatformed, the historically disadvantaged, the colonized, the bullied, the one or two survivors of their kind, the fish, the bird, the bear or verb, and all the poisoned seas. Where will I park the care I owe to you while I spare from the work that only I can do, the spate of compassion the moment's agonies ask? It doesn't have to do much good, I guess, to count. Not to fear is to fail to live. And compassion is the breathing of the world within the world. Still, what use of phrases? My dog's brown, uplifted eyes ask, when what they want is lethal aid. What use one's love and all the lyric phrases one could float their way, when it's airlift, when it's oxygen, when it's time itself and ordnance, when it's justice that they crave. In the rain that falls again, a soft suggestion of the panic further north, I wait for the news to turn, but the rain itself is the news, and how it wants to break. And one day, I'm supposing, when the news decides finally to end, there may come again some sun. But until then, say the dogs, walk us, and then get done the less important work that sits like tomorrow morning all over this afternoon's desk. Several birds and a dog. This poem is called. It's on page 34. In an earlier draft, it was called Reservoir Dogs, but I decided that was a bit derivative. There is a reservoir near where we are in Wundagara country, down outside Barrel, and dogs have been known to wander there. One of those dogs is called Dante, the other is called Carlos. Call them their dogs, right? Several birds and a dog. This is actually a very short poem. It's a Sejo couplet, actually, fair Sejos. In time, one's children, like one's youth, fly. But let no one rush them. Above the reservoir, where I go for breathing lessons, Smokehawk circles like a carpenter's hands, sanding the east wind smooth. The dog, who's learning the place like a faith I'd like to practice, abandons the made way for the water's edge, the sedge and mud. Among all that eludes him, firetail and tree creeper and wren. That one's Dante, right? So the made way. Here's a poem for my father. I just had two poems published side by side in an international collection called Live Encounters, I think that one's called, and I sent them 6 poems, and they chose the one for Mum and the one for Dad. Isn't that beautiful? So I'm being all filial here, and I mentioned Mum before, she's not doing so well. Dad's 90, so this was for his 90th birthday. This poem is actually written in response to a painting by Josh Yeldham. This is the Joshua Yeldham cover on my book, fabulous painter, Joshua Yeldon. He so gets the spirit world and the physical world, I think. This poem is a kind of ekphrastic in a way that's written in response to his poem, Holding My Father's Heart, to his painting, Holding My Father's Heart. It was for my father, Bruce, on his 90th birthday last October. And it's a rima. So it has a rhyme scheme like Dante's that you'll pick it up, and a rhythm scheme. If I could hold my father's heart, my hand would be a garden bed. And all the years he's turned the art he's practiced on the plants might shed, like leaves or evening light, some truth more true than most of what's been said. On how to live a life of use, on how to raise a choir up without much of a voice to use yourself. My hand would be a cup in which the seasons pooled and rang, and dogs and children's names ran up and down suburban halls and sang the modest lessons thrift had schooled my father in, the soil's slang for prospering on care, and rules that tend to work no matter what the fashion says, for older tools are more the kind of thing that God had by when first he dreamed the garden. How light are 90 years to hold. The world when you were young fell hard from war into depression. You came into a world in spring, time's gardens beginning again, a curate's time, the season of the shepherd. The world was a parish, the world was a dairy farm when you took your first steps in it. The word was God, and the word was God was good with a spade, and not too bad with numbers. He saved more than he spent, they said. And you learned to see a berry where others saw only straw. And from your father, you learned to take the kind of chance creation takes with time. Small moves achieve the greatest ground. And patience, the art of the earth, will always prove the wiser way in the end. If I could hold my father's heart, this trove of moments, small ways standing by, it wouldn't be a weight of words I held, but a kind of levity, a lightness of touch, a flight of birds. There you go, Dad. A poem called So Far, made famous because Calvin Bowman, the great Australian composer, has now written a piano work to this poem, commissioned by Jodie Williams, my partner. And the poem is for Jodie, so everyone's a winner, right? Calvin, do you know Calvin's work? Very beautiful contemporary composer. And Calvin came to my 60th birthday party and performed this, a world premiere in a shed in Kangaroo, Avoca, I should say. So Far, Jodie Williams. This one's in Walking Under Water. So far, or so far, depending on where you want to put the syllable stress, so far or so far. From 2Ks under, this is a Sejo sequence as well actually, from 2Ks under all this beach and all it covers, water warmed by some old heat that deep rocks keep rises. And if you dig far enough back from the shallows, far enough down in the dark sand, you can make a bath to lie in under the moon. You too, love, have come so far to find yourself at ease in hot water. Healing is a moment 1 foot deep. It took 10 years and 5 hours road time to divine. The country we came through looks like love itself, a landscape not quite finished composing itself when everything broke loose. The world unfolded its flags and unmade half of what the rising mountains thought the singing forests almost were. It's New Zealand, right? It comes on dusk, and in the batches, lights wake up against the dark. Upstream, the sun turns in. Along the break the terns lay nets, and a gannet, like a soft stone, drops as if the backwash were all it took to clean her butterscotch face in time for tea. Walking from the beach we scare a plover, one of the last 400 of her kind, from where she sits, her nest, in harm's way. She breaks cover, abandons all her pretty ones to make them safe. Beauty is the moral to nature's story. What you do with what you have to cope with what you get. The time is never right, it seems, for rest. Adaptation is the oldest habit in the world, and even that won't always do. But the bird's rush is a flush of hope, and we carry it to the car and will the bird back to its young. Darkness flares and forgives the long day its short fuse, and we start home. The way in is the only way out. It bends no easier by night, but there is no easy way, and you found yours and a bath at the end of it, and me. When stars grow tired, they find you. Eternity's hard work and a long way, and you know it. They bed down with you and give me the wheel, so that when I look in the mirror, I see heaven stretched out in the back seat, and beauty is a girl with sand in her hair. And I'll close on this poem, which is a sonnet. I grew up in, I'm in Gundungurra country now. I grew up in Epping. When I was born, Macquarie University was not. And I watched it through the 60s, emerge. My soul's been at Macquarie a long time, and I'm fond of Macquarie. It feels like a country I understand. This poem actually alludes to Epping, where I was young, and a moment where a few years ago I put my jacket on the shoulders of my young son, who's now bigger than I am. It wouldn't fit anymore, but it did at the time, and found myself in Epping again, contemplating things, as one does. Tonight I walk the streets where I was born. Tonight I walk the streets where I was born. Oxford and Cambridge and Beecroft and Kent. The night is clear and Jupiter sleeps beneath the moon. And all the shops know how to sell is real estate these days. And the station's moved on into its third age. My jacket lay on the shoulders of my son today, and now it keeps the night out on the streets where I was young. And wait for you to come. And here I should turn until the night that passed has caught the last train out of town. Or wonder how it is I've grown so old and hardly learned a trick. But that was always true. And this is too. Love waits near midnight where love always did.
I feel rather put out that no one's ever written a love poem about me. Maybe there's still time. So I have no words for that beautiful, beautiful poetry, and we can see why you've had 2 Premier Prizes, the Montreal, Cardiff, Newcastle, Blake, and ACU Poetry Prizes. And Mark also has an OAM for services to literature and education. So thank you so much. And now I'm going to allow Mark to introduce our 3rd poet of the evening. Over to you to introduce Marcel. Thank you.
Marcel Freeman and I are meeting for the first time tonight, but we know each other through our work, and I realised tonight how indebted I am to Marcel, because for some years at Macquarie University she's been setting for her core students the Little Red Riding Book and the Little Green Grammar Book, which is mine about craft, which I'm very proud actually, and very grateful. So I'm glad we're connected in that way. But Marcel, in my mind, has always been one of Australia's fine. Am I doing that?
I'll mute it.
It's been one of Australia's fine lyric poets, and like all of us say a similar thing, but your concerns seem to me to be with memory and wealth and truth of life and beauty and what it means to be. Marcellus will become maybe known to you and will become dear a little from perhaps the way she speaks is from South Africa too in the first place. So there's a diasporic story here as well. In Marcel's work, critically, she's been teaching in English, where she's an honorary associate professor at Macquarie University for many years. Do you find yourself now in retirement? Is that or halfway there?
As of last week.
Yay! So this is a very enviable state, it strikes me, as somebody who's still in thick of trying to find enough time to write. But through all of that busyness, Marcel's managed to make 3 fine works. White Lines, which was 2010, that's the second one, I'm sorry. Monkey's Wedding was 1995, that was where I first encountered you. And most recently, just last year, through Puncher and Watman, wonderful Australian press, Spirit Level, from which you probably might read tonight. And Marcel, it's great to be with you, and welcome.
Hi, everybody. I hope that's okay. I'm going to read to you tonight from my new book, Spirit Level, and in fact, what with COVID and everything, this is the first kind of big outing that the book has had. So I'm very proud to be reading here. As Marcus suggested, I grew up in South Africa, and I think also because I'm Jewish, memory just doesn't let go. So I'm going to read a couple of poems or parts of poems, and you'll be able to see what I do really without me explaining, I think, too much. The poem The Dam is the longest poem in the book, and it's a poem that I was triggered to think about this idea of this reservoir where we used to swim when I was a child, and we used to go to spend summertime with my grandparents. They had a small holding farm out near Boksburg on the reef near Johannesburg. And I remembered about the dam when I was listening to a conference talk one time on the work of David Malouf and his use of water in his book, The Great World, as a kind of it was interpreted in that talk as a kind of baptismal symbol or metaphor. But this poem sort of cooked for a long time. It's a very long poem, and I'm just going to read a little bit about it. I didn't know where this poem was going to take me until I started to write it, and it took me quite a long time. So this is from halfway through the first part. The dam, a concrete reservoir, fed water to the house and orchard. Loomed ahead, a squat cylinder at the end of the paddock. Soon we were climbing onto the narrow wall, legs straddling, then over, my feet like little whitish paddles. In the midday glare, tadpoles bumped in rows, their head a ring of beads around on the wall's edge, a circle of light surrounding the watery darkness. Holding the ladder, I backed in, heels pressed, toes gripping the sludgy coating. Above our heads, the wind pump clanked as the wind changed direction, its tail fin a sail, blades turning lazy and squeaking. My brother calling out explained how the pump shaft pulled water from the dark ground aquifers below. We hovered, the water tasting of metal and rock. The boys splashed, ducking under, then up, shouting, while I pushed out from the mossy wall, doggy paddling. Clouds of itchy dust came down from the plane trees, yellow flecks speckling the surface. With tadpoles and slime of frog spawn, we made trails, small circles in the water. I see us now as if from above, our tiny tracks, sunlit splashes marking an hour in an afternoon, our kicks footprints in a time span, evanescent spray puffs in the heat of day. Ducking my face, open-eyed, the floor thick-layered silt and mud, the cold through my hair, swimsuit billowing, my scurries mudding the sediment, drifting it up, turned the water murky brown so I could not see. And hurrying back to the concrete wall, the sharp rusty peel of the ladder, glad to hear the clank of the wind pump overhead. Then walking home, chatter and peach trees, thrum of bees, a shuddering horse, and in early afternoon heat, the repeated thwack and chop of Jacob's mattock as he swung, then hit against the hard ground by the mealie patch behind the house. Because this story is also about Jacob. His English name, I don't remember any other, who taught me to greet Dumela in Sotho, who helped me to see which side of the scale was mine. So to read the rest of the poem, you'll have to get a copy. Okay, the next poem that I'd like to read is actually very much tied to my my Jewish inheritance, of course. I'm Jewish, and this is based on, of course, a very, this kind of seminal story of Abraham and Isaac. The poem is called The Well, and in this poem I wanted to actually give Isaac a voice, but then I wanted to give Abraham a voice too. Isaac. I could smell lime dust in the wadi that third night of our journey. Stars were fading. It was cold. When sacrifice is called, blood spills in the sand, fur flies. My father carried the fire stone tenderly like a child, knife sheathed at his side. But where was the animal, the offering? With eyes turned deep, he said, God will see to it, and I believed. We built the pyre, a tent of branches. Each movement of our hands was ritual. We had done this before many times. I followed my father each move. Then he pulled me down, suddenly downwards, beard to my cheek, binding my ankles and shoulders. My body water, his knife in moonlight, my skin turned fur, breath dry, dawn dashed across the sky. I could not hold its light. Then, as if for the first time, he saw the other, the ram in the thicket, curling horns, nostrils flared, caught in thorns. We could smell the blood. I have seen my father blind to the pulse beneath my skin. His task great as the stars in heaven, numerous as grains of sand on the shore. On this salt earth, not seeing the sky, nor the child whose heart beat like a bird against the corner of a stone. Abraham. Before that driest journey, I thought my feet were planted on rock, had sunk a well softened with tamarisk at the desert place, Beersheba. Each day the skies breathed light on us, the tamarisk pushed roots into salt where I had written her name. We claimed her water in skin bags as with silver spigots, but some days I could not see my face in the cold surface. After that night, Isaac did not meet my eye a long time. Now I plead with him, say, our lives are grasses in the wind. I have grieved each day upon the rock. This is all we have. Beneath the tamarisk, one star. It was love that drove my hands, the darkness between the stars, our seat time on this earth. I might have used the blade, the greater choice, to submit to the wind. Okay, so to move to a different tone, I'd like to read a poem about a memory of growing up in Johannesburg. This poem is called Crickets, and I've subtagged it Johannesburg 1956, so it's an old memory, based on an old memory, shall I say, because these memories are present all the time when they show up. Crickets. Walking home from school, the roads hard-edged, brick yellow houses, tile and corrugated iron, a grey dog, barking on a chain. Dusty smell, gardens unwatered say no one's home. The dryness could bend me like a bow. But round a corner on 12th Avenue, Nanny's voices like bells, the afternoon their resting time, the green-brown crickets began to grind their legs together in bottle brush up against the fence, purple velvet moth dust all down the street. A hole in the sky of memory opens, unlocks a reach of gravel pale as resin. Jacarandas stand a silent choir, crickets vibrato, washing the stones. I'd like to read a poem here called White Lines 2. And this poem was actually triggered by a painting by the Australian artist Tony Tuxon, and it's the title of my first book, White Lines Vertical. So it's an abstract work. It's on an indigo background with white slashes all across, very energetic. The poem is a kind of philosophical meditation, and it's dedicated to my little white dog, Jessie, who died about 8 years ago, and I miss her. White Lines 2. In the gravel of a road, all we have layers itself at the pointed juncture of this cold white moment. The brown earthy past is damp, channeled as if by tears, as if tears had whitened the start-stop beating. I was hopeful for clarity, for something clear as water, not this effort on and on. The marks on a board, the clippings on the wall, the lost, steering, caught silences of days. Something clear as a white line, floating hopeful across this second, this pocketed, clawed-for, little hunting self, seeking satisfaction, like letters of a name not written, white-pointed footprints on air, even the muddy cracks, spores you made, nose driven on suburban pavements, mucked with litter, sniffed absences of others. The white lines passed each other, and they shone. Thanks. And I think I'll just end with a short one, or maybe two. I'll just see how much time it takes. So this is the first poem in the book. It's called Still. And this poem was really started when I was in a classroom of creative writing students, and I would give them a free writing exercise or something. It was raining outside, and I'd give them the exercise. And back in the day when there was time to do these things in class, I actually sat and wrote with them. So this poem, obviously, I had to do a lot more with it, but it came out of that moment. Still. There's a stillness I require, no rain drumming on the surfaces of things. Now, there is no quiescent water, rather a dry crackle of grasses, a sunset in Africa, yellow-brown and moving, soft as hair. Only the child's eye can see a memory like this, a making of time. Here, there is nothing in your eyes that can take me back there, though I want those traces of past where every stone turns for me as the line grows shorter. The stillness I seek is not darkness. It is the shimmer of red at the centre of the throat of a leather-faced monkey calling across acacias. A heart muscle pink as flamingos against a mirror of russet plains. The thrum of rain on the roof returns. Times of dislocation, each sense a feeler reaching for the light. Okay, thank you. I'll stop there. Thanks.
I think you'll all agree that so many different styles, but each one unique and each one more beautiful than the next, We've really been well entertained tonight. So, Mark, once again, thank you so much for being with us. So wonderful and honored to have you at the museum. Marcel, your poetry was just wonderful. I loved every moment, brought back many memories of our South African days. And of course, the man of the moment this evening, the launch of your very first poetry book. May many more words tumble out of that walnut brain and down the arm and into another book. You see, I could become a poet too. Mazel tov, well done. May you go from strength to strength. And I'm going to ask you to close off the evening this evening with one of your final poems. And as you've been warned, you may not exit without a book in your hands. Thank you all very, very much for being with us this evening. It's been wonderful. Thank you. The mic is yours. Come this way.
I'm going to close off this evening with a poem called The Weight of a Raisin. An electromagnetic field, almost alive it was, the spice shop, emitting a periodic frequency, the aroma of exoticism, a palace of frankincense and myrrh, cloves from Zanzibar, cinnamon from Batavia, saffron from Mesopotamia, or was it Assyria? Ah, saffron, my unattainable Greek goddess, for your yellow golden hue and fragrance you thank Crochin and Saffronol. How could science ever diminish the magical allure of an item more precious than gold? US dollars 5,000 a kilo. You can keep your poppies. But I had come for humbler things. 200 grams each of plump golden seedless raisins and almonds, toasted and unsalted. I found them between the Egyptian medjool dates and the Turkish Smyrna figs. The spice merchant's daughter was a fast-spinning neutron star with a frequency of her own, her ebullient self redolent not of her merchandise, unlike the fishmonger's daughter who was, but of lavender, sandalwood, jasmine, and lemongrass. She had amiable cranial nerves, smiling eyes, and a winsome disposition, that of a talk host show. Her scoop, though, was her finest attribute, for she knew the weight of a raisin, predictable as a metronome. She scooped onto her scale merchandise to the fraction of a gram, precisely. And when asked how, she answered with laughing eyes, "It's all in the fingertips." Those fingertips had Fingerspitzgefühlen, that same honed intuition that allows the cloth merchant's daughter to grade fabric in the dark with finger feel alone. The spice merchant's daughter had also the easy kindness of a nurse, soothing a child with candy, and she offered me a cracker of sesame and honey. And though touched by her hand only, it seemed as if made by the hand of God.